Newfoundland, Easter weekend, April 2015. A man is shot and killed by police. More than a year later, we still wait for answers to the disturbing questions about what happened and why. On Thursday, April 2nd, Newfoundland Premier Paul Davis was in his official car. With him was Cabinet Minister Sandy Collins. Collins sent a tweet, "Riding with the Premier, listening to The Sun in Your Eyes by Sherman Gown." Disabled injured worker Don Dunphy, a prolific Twitter user, was at home in Mitchellsbrook. He fired back a tweet to Collins and the Premier. "Put on sunglasses and take out the earplugs. You might hear people crying for help." Dunphy quickly followed that with 3 more tweets, which mentioned 2 former politicians who looked down on poor people, but who died before getting their pensions. Then Dunphy tweeted that those politicians were 2 prick-dead MHAs. I won't mention names, they might have good family members I may hurt. In subsequent days, most people would interpret that as Dunphy being considerate of their families. Easter Sunday, April 5th, Don's daughter Megan took him for Sunday brunch at the Woodstock Colonial Restaurant in Paradise, just outside of St. John's. Early afternoon, Don drove himself home to Mitchellsbrook, about an hour west. And the unthinkable happened.
Welcome to the show, everyone. I'm David Cochran. On Easter Sunday, an RNC officer shot and killed a civilian for the first time in nearly 15 years. Don Dunphy was being investigated for comments he made on Twitter. A police officer assigned to protect the Premier visited his home. What happened next led to Don Dunphy's death, has left a family in mourning and a province looking for answers.
The province, and especially Don's daughter Megan, are looking, but more than a year later, the number of answers from police and government stands at exactly 0.
So much has happened in that year. I think today we feel more grief and more sadness and maybe more confusion and still like no sense of understanding.
Meanwhile, the questions pile up like logs on a funeral pyre, and in the resulting vacuum, speculation is the only option people are left with.
To date, the RCMP
gave a press conference the next day to say that Dunphy was killed by a member of the Premier's security detail, but they would not and still have not named him. Why not? It was Sergeant, now Constable, Joe Smythe. We found that out on Twitter, and he later came forward to confirm it. Why did Smythe go to Dunphy's home, alone, driving the Premier's official car, in plain clothes, armed, and out of his jurisdiction?
They're concerned over the way the guy came in to do the investigation. If Donnie was a threat, why would they send in one plainclothes officer?
The police officer was faced with Mr. Dunphy holding a long-barreled firearm, which was pointed at the officer.
Why did the RCMP report the next day that Dunphy had pointed a loaded rifle at the officer when he, Smythe, was the only witness and no forensics could have been done yet? Did Smythe write the email leaked to the press the day of Don Dunphy's funeral in which he said he had no regrets and said Dunphy needed an earlier intervention? Who identified Dunphy's tweet as a threat? Who sent Smythe? Was it Smythe himself? And was Smythe actually driving the Premier on April 2nd when Dunphy sent his tweet to Collins and the Premier? And how could a highly trained officer and bodyguard, in peak physical condition, as this man clearly is, allow a 150-pound, 59-year-old disabled man to get the drop on him?
He's a mid-career officer. He has significant training and experience in the area of protective services.
There are many troubling questions about Smythe's behavior at the scene and how long it took him to call paramedics. Did he even call them? Will we ever get to see his phone records for that day? Was Smythe tested for drugs or alcohol after the shooting? Was he given 2 days to make his statement? If so, why?
Davis's staff.
Why did Premier Davis say his family had been threatened when clearly they had not?
you see a comment made like that that's directed, it's directed towards, appeared to me to be directed towards me and another cabinet minister, and also the people who are most important to us, our families.
More important, why did Davis phone Smythe the night of the shooting? He said to offer his support. Was that all? If so, was that appropriate?
I had a conversation with him late last night.
How was it?
It's really difficult. I'm not in a position to be able to assess how he is. I just made a call to him to pass along my best regards to him, let him know that I was thinking about him as well.
Joe Smythe and Paul Davis have been friends since they were both in the RNC. But shouldn't Davis know, as both premier and a former police officer, that it was inappropriate and prejudicial to phone an officer involved in a fatal shooting? Former Premier Paul Davis says he was not interviewed by the RCMP for their investigation into Dunphy's shooting. Why not? Why was Dunphy even being investigated when he was actually well known to politicians through his activism for injured workers' rights? He had frequent interactions with politicians on Twitter, including Sandy Collins, and Dunphy had never been known to be violent.
Whatever, I have never seen anything out of Don Dunphy, but the utmost respect for women, for children, for animals. There's nothing I can say any different than that.
Don Dunphy was very active on Twitter. His more than 27,000 tweets give an accurate picture of his concerns. Why was his account taken down less than 2 days after he was killed? Why was the local RCMP tasked with investigating the shooting when their own policies prohibit it? Was that at the insistence of the Davis government? Why did the RNC ignore the memorandum they had with the Ontario Provincial Police, the OPP, to investigate in circumstances like this? The RCMP promised to have the results of their investigation by August of 2015. It wasn't ready until January 2016. Why? Was there political interference to hold back the results until after the November 30th Newfoundland election? Are they going to attempt to portray John Dunphy as mentally unbalanced? There is no evidence that he was, but there is considerable evidence that he was not.
They said they were going to burn it, and they're having a fire for the July 1st celebration.
If there had been no cell phone video of the shooting of Sammy Yatin or the taser death of Robert Jacansky, would their families still be in the dark about what happened to them? Megan Dunphy is, and so are we all. Is there another scenario that gives a more logical explanation of the shooting of Don Dunphy?
They only hurt you. They only cause more pain and suffering.
Yeah, you've told me about you've had some friends that have actually committed suicide through all this because of this process, the way they treat these people, and how long it takes to get help and assistance.
Many. It's because the bottom line is this: they've sent the police to me 5 times. I've been terrorized.
Is it possible that with an election coming up, Don's tweets were considered politically embarrassing to the government? And that Don's final tweet was not a threat at all, but was an excuse for the Premier's friend and bodyguard to visit him and tell him to shut up? If that was the case, we're still left with the question of what happened in Don Dunphy's home between him and the bodyguard on Easter Sunday.
We've got 2 separate issues. We have the issues that lead up to why the police came to his home, but then we have the issue of what happened in the home. That's the issue that the family are most concerned about.
Meanwhile, the RCMP completed their investigation in January 2015. An outside team was brought in from Alberta to review the RCMP investigation. And still well over a year later, the family and public have no information about the killing of their father, friend, and fellow citizen. By contrast, in the case of the shooting of Sammy Yatim, Officer James Forcillo was named in 3 days, and in less than a month a police investigation was completed and Forcillo was charged with murder. These are just some of the questions that need to be answered, but the most important question is, who has a right to know? Does Megan Dunphy have a right to know what happened to her father? Do Don's friends, family, and community have a right to know? And do we all, as Canadians, have a right to know? Because if only the police, government, and security establishment have a right to know how a person died by their hand, then we are living in nothing less than a police state.
A premature loss of life like this can only be described as a tragedy. And I sincerely hope that in the end the family finds the answers to the questions that I'm sure they have.
For Don Dunphy's sake, and your own, demand to know why he was killed for a tweet.